name's Megan Weiss, and I am one of two senior judges that is going to be helping facilitate our session today. I'm going to start with just some introduction comments that I've been asked to go over. So I'm just going to kind of walk through those, and then we'll do some introductions of all of the judges so you kind of know who your audience is today. And then we will pretty much turn it over to the team for their presentation. So in this part of the competition, as you know, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure, in the beginning of your presentation that everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. So we want to make sure we're clear on that. You will have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three counts. So my co-senior judge, Joe, is going to be keeping time for us today. So he'll be watching that clock for you, if we're at the 25-minute mark. During this time, you will be uninterrupted. So that's really your time to present and go through everything that you've prepared for today. When you're finished, we're going to kind of take some turns between all the judges to ask you questions for about 10 to 15 minutes. During the Q&A, both you and judges stay in character, so we will remain in whatever character you've assigned us and ask questions in that way. And then after the Q&A is done, we will kind of stop role playing, and then we will give you all just some general feedback about the presentation and how it went. So that's the general structure that we're going to go through. So with that, I'll just briefly introduce myself. So as I said, my name is Megan Weiss, and I am an ethics director at Raytheon Technologies, which is a defense contractor that I work out of our facility here in El Segundo, California, so not too far from LMU's campus. Today, obviously, I am calling in from home, but that's my role, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe to introduce himself.
Well, good day, everyone. Again, my name is Joe Wilkins. Thank you, Megan. I will be keeping time for us today, and I currently serve as a consultant in healthcare. I work for TRG. We're based in Philadelphia. I live in the Southern California area and travel across the nation, do a sort number of projects. So looking forward to today's presentation.
Okay, great. And we have a few other judges joining us here today. Let me just look at my list here. So let's start with Gail. Oh, Gail, I think you're on mute.
I don't know how to get the picture back because once you put the presentation up, I disappeared. Let's see.
Okay, we can hear you now.
All right.
Can one of our IT people help give her a tip on seeing the picture?
Yeah, because I can see her.
Oh, you can? Well, maybe I just can't see myself. Okay, I'll just go. Undergrad, I went to LMU and got an MBA from SC. I have been the class rep since I graduated in '73. I have spent my career in finance, financing buyouts. I have been involved with LMU when the ethics program started and we started doing this competition, and I have been serving on, I serve on the Dean's Executive Council for Dale Smith, and I was on the Board of Regents since 2017 and just joined the Board of Trustees. So I'm a longtime LMU person, and I have a 26-year-old daughter who's in fashion. Nothing like her mom.
Great, thank you, Gail. And Jana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Get off mute here. Jana Roberts. I went to Loyola, and then I got my MBA in business, and went to law school. and I went into contracts. So I work for another defense aerospace company, Northrop Grumman, as a manager of contracts.
Okay, great. And I was just checking, did we have Andreas join us? I don't see him.
Yes, he did. He just joined us. So Andreas, if you could unmute yourself, we are asking the judges to keep their videos on so the teams can see them.
Yeah, sure. Give me just 1 sec. There we go. Now you guys should be able to see me. Can you see me?
It's a little fuzzy right now. I think we saw you for a minute there. Let's see. It seems like something might be blocking it, maybe.
Can you see me now? Apologies, guys.
Yes, now.
There we
There we
go.
go. Hi there. So my name is Andreas Seckler. I graduated from Loyola Marymount in 2012. I studied entrepreneurship and have worked since then in management consulting and executive coaching with Global 100 companies, working on the strategic side and working with the leadership teams of those organizations to advise them how to work better towards their organizational goals by focusing on how their team interacts behaviorally and relationally, and how that factors into their strategy. So very, very excited to be part of this today, as it brings me back to my LMU days. So thanks for having me.
Okay, great. Right. So I think with that, we're ready to turn it over to the team presentation. Please go right ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us, the board of directors of Apple. Please just pull out your phone or look at the computer you're using today for this meeting. All of these products has battery made with Cobalt. Now, imagine you're a martyr in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Your child had just died in a mine collapse at a large-scale mine Apple by Cobalt form. As the #7 most innovations company and most profit tech company in the world, we believe you can change this practice, and these presentations will demonstrate how. Before we get into it, I would like to introduce our BEA advisor team. I'm Tong Zhao.
I'm Bryn McDowell.
I'm Rachel Scott.
My name is Jack Allen.
And throughout our presentation, we will answer two main questions. The first question is Apple ethically responsible for the safety of Cobalt miners? And our answer for this is yes. Apple is ethically responsible for the safety of Cobalt miners. And the second question is, can Apple change the working condition in the Cobalt mining industry? And our answer for this question is also yes. I know there's a lot of factors we need to get into, consider, before we can easily just answer yes for both questions. So we will take 3 steps to present how we come up with these yeses. First, we will introduce the assessment of the situation to make sure we understand the background information. Second, we will do ethical evaluations to have a deeper understanding of the issue. Lastly, we will present our guidance. First, let's start with Apple. Apple is a giant tech company. It has 230 billion revenue, 48.8 billion cash in hand, and 139 million employees. With only this few key number, we already can tell that Apple is a very influential and powerful company. Its products include smartphone, tablet, computer, and servers. As you can imagine, all of these Apple's products require battery made with Cobalt, and all of these products are used by government, business, and individuals. So the topic that we are talking about today is actually not that far away from our daily life. In terms of Cobalt mining, we will focus on the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa, where Apple is getting its Cobalt from. The DRC has 34% of the world's Cobalt reserve, which create a huge business opportunity for DRC. 23.9 of foremost employment, 186 to 388 million in gross production value, and 20% of GDP. Most importantly, 97.5% of national export. All of these numbers just show us how important the cobalt business is for this country. Going back to Apple, we can clearly see the connection between the DRC and Apple. DRC provides 60% of the world's supplies, and the largest consumer of cobalt in the world is Apple. In June 2019, Apple had already directly buying cobalt from the DRC, so whatever happens in DRC will affect Apple directly.
In regards to the cobalt mining industry in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we have three main players. Firstly, the DRC government. It is heavily involved in the mining industry, but not in a regulatory manner. The government is mainly involved to get profits and often partners with large corporations looking for cheap labor. Government officials are usually corrupt and will sacrifice citizens' health and safety in order to attract big businesses. In addition, the DRC economy is extremely unstable, and about 77% of the population lives in extreme poverty. Secondly, we have large-scale mining companies, or LSM. These are corporate-owned, usually foreign companies that perform deep mining in the DRC. And as I said previously, they normally have some sort of agreement with the government. These companies sell their production to refineries, which in turn sell it to large tech companies such as Apple. Also Dell and Tesla are two of the other large customers. These companies have some regulation and protection for their employees in the mines, but not enough for it to be really effective. And lastly, we have artisanal scale mining, or ASM companies. These consist of small groups of people or very small companies that mine only on the surface for cobalt. That's mainly just because they don't have the equipment like LSM companies do. And this is the most dangerous form of mining. Employees normally have no protection against any of the dangers involved with mining, and the mines are really prone to collapse. They usually sell their production directly to refineries as well, or often are involved in smuggling it illegally out of the country, which also adds an element of violence. During our research of this topic, we created a power asymmetry graph we created qualitative categories such as land use, financial claim, employee safety, and reputation, just to name a few. And we gave each of the three players that I just mentioned numerical scores on how much control they had over a specific category. While this is a rough estimate, we do acknowledge that our results show that Apple can have a significant influence in a large majority of these categories, and that in almost all the categories, employees had little to no control. So our main point is to say that the power asymmetry here breeds the abusive working environment. Most people are going to ask, and you're probably wondering the same thing, is why should Apple care? Why should Apple care about any of this? And as some of you may know, in 2018, Apple started taking steps to directly source its cobalt supply from mining companies, essentially cutting out one or several middlemen. Demand for cobalt is expected to grow 7 to 13% year over year until 2030. This is due to just increased use of tech, as well as the dawn of the electric car, which the batteries in electric cars do also use cobalt. Apple needs to secure a supply of this non-renewable asset that all of its products rely on. Apple is closer to this issue than ever, and we believe as the most profitable tech company and one of the most influential companies, these factors create an environment for increased responsibility. And we all know that the main purpose of a business is to create shareholder wealth. But again, we believe as Apple as well as all companies also have a responsibility for stakeholders as well as shareholders, such as employees, the environment, anyone in the supply chain, even people indirectly involved. Apple has the financial resources to protect employees at the very first stage of the supply chain and still easily satisfy shareholder needs. And my teammate Jack will go into more detail later in our presentation.
So I'd like to highlight some of the benefits of cobalt mining. So the first being poverty reduction. So because cobalt mining does provide so many of the jobs within the DRC, you do employ a lot of locals and see communities grow. And that in turn develops the community because it does provide more jobs, economic growth, which is then stimulated and allows for wealth to be distributed throughout the town. As well as create a more diverse community because lower unemployment means there's more spending, resulting in areas of growth besides mining. And so with that being said, you have these people with secure jobs and they give the miners a steady stream of income. And if they work with LSMs, then they are more likely to have less workplace hazards as well as be involved in less illegal practices within the mines. With secondary markets, we're looking at the artisanal markets mostly because people can take the extracted minerals that are considered waste during the mining process and sell them, which creates more jobs or even second streams of income for some individuals. That revenue in turn will go to the state, which allows for them to redistribute funds to other parts of the country in order to further develop healthcare, transportation, education, a bunch of other factors. And finally, we like to highlight social identity because there have been times where workers have come together to create change in the mines by themselves. One of the major being in 2017 when the Congolese government introduced penalties to those who are using children in mines. And this just goes to show that the larger the group participating, the easier it is for it to implement change. Despite these benefits, however, there are several drawbacks. So the first being accidents and occupational hazards. So even though that mining code was implemented in 2017, reports have said that the inspection and upholding of the laws have been quite poor, resulting in increased cobalt in children urine, lung damage from dust particles, some birth defects, and child labor continues to be an issue, as well as many other unenforced practices. And this eventually flows into the water stream and pollutes the drinkable water within the area, as well as destroys landmarks or areas of near extinct wildlife because people are going to continue looking for land where they can extract mining just to generate a profit. And then the final three come hand in hand with each other, exploitation of miners, political corruption, and violence. So we mentioned that the DRC government is quite corrupt, and within the DRC, it is a developing country, so poverty is quite prevalent, and people are going to take whatever job they can get, regardless of the future repercussions. And so those who are in control are going to take advantage of that because they realize there are limited alternatives and the replaceability of people is very high. So additionally, within the artisanal mines, you have a lot less regulation. So people can smuggle easier, resulting in decreased benefits for the community because there is no governing body that's implementing the change. Finally, because it is a profitable business, people are looking to get as much land as they can. And with no enforcement of peaceful competition, you're going to have a ruthless environment where people are going to act in their own self-interest, and it's going to create a last man standing situation, which is very undesirable.
This is kind of a timeline of Apple throughout the cobalt industry. So in 2016, Apple added cobalt to their annual review of mining practices. This is a relatively new addition, which emphasizes that the regulation and tracking of cobalt is also fairly new. In 2017, Apple stopped purchasing cobalt from small-scale mines, which only really exacerbates the challenges that were mentioned by Jack in the previous slide. In 2019, there was a release of the progress report that was based on 2018 data. This will be more addressed in the next slide. However, the people filling out the assessment were described to be illiterate, desperately poor, and exceedingly vulnerable, which I think is important to note. And in June 2019, Apple started to buy cobalt directly from the source, which really increased their responsibility in the matter. This also, in December 2019, Apple was named in a lawsuit that was involving child labor and mines collapsing, which kind of demonstrates that Apple pulled out of small-scale mines, even though the same unethical situations were happening in the large-scale mines that they were buying from. So I mentioned in the previous slide that Apple's 2019 Suppliers Responsibility Progress Report was based on 2018 data. So Apple every year sends an evaluation to the large-scale mines where Apple, along with mine managers, fill out a checklist and rate themselves on a scale of 100, which you guys can see from the 89, 93, and 93 that they had scored themselves. So between the self-evaluation tactic and the power asymmetry between Apple and the large-scale mines, we deemed this assessment to be highly uncredible. This can be seen by inequalities not only in what they were reporting for labor and human rights as a deduction of 0.2 for child labor, but it can also be seen through science and what they reported for what their environmental impact deductions were, and because these were happening at the same time as the lawsuit.
As we mentioned previously, in late 2019, the International Rights Advocate, which is a nonprofit organization focusing on labor issues, filed a class action lawsuit citing Apple in that, and this was on behalf of 13 anonymous plaintiffs that had worked in the mines. And in the court filings, the IRA had proof that Apple is aware of the conditions in the mine, or in several mines. And also cited in the court documents, it says that Apple knowingly benefited from and aided and abetted in the cruel and brutal use of employees in DRC to mine cobalt. And while Apple does have audit systems and employee complaint filing mechanisms in place, they rely on the ability of the people to use them. And again, it's cited in the court document that largely illiterate, desperately poor, and exceedingly vulnerable people are the ones trying to use these mechanisms for their own benefit, and they are unable to do that. Apple's supplier code of conduct states that Apple will assess its suppliers' compliance with the code, and any violation of this code may jeopardize a supplier's business relationship with Apple up to and including termination. And again, we believe Apple as a company can live up to this code of conduct more efficiently.
Obviously, the DRC is like very far away from America physically, but there's still a number of things you can do as a powerful company. You can change the treatment of workers and business practice in the DRC. You can increase the traceability and reporting of products, and you can also limit environmental impact.
So we are guiding Apple to first and foremost form a task force between the government of the DRC, a non-government organization, and Apple. This task force will create a sustainable, environmental, and legally acceptable contract to send to these large-scale mines to implement. We are also guiding Apple to make contracts with the artisanal scale miners, which will reamp their relationship with them and be able to formalize all mining practices on both levels. This is to increase control over all phases of the supply chain and increase Apple's access to the 20% of the land that the ASM still holds. In this analysis, we're assuming that the large-scale mines, with the threat of the proper repercussions found in Apple's supplier code of conduct and governmental control, will follow the contracts created by the task force, and they will also act with a respectable practice towards small-scale mines. However, as a check and balance, we are saying to increase Apple's use of a third-party auditor that comes from a non-for-profit. We are then suggesting an increase in traceability and transparency. Traceability or lack of traceability has been identified as a major source for unethical behavior. So by implementing technology like QR codes that can trace from extraction to final use in both ASM and LSM mines, it'll be easier to find where there's a fault in labor practices and take the proper precautions or proper steps ahead. This will also be easier to secure the supply chain in the DRC. And then by having public disclosure of payments and contracts and non-business sensitive agreements, it will hold not only Apple, but the government of the DRC and the mines to a higher moral standards from stakeholders and shareholders. And then this is kind of just a graphic that's describing the cycle that we have just described. And basically what I want to point out here is that with large scale mines and small scale mines interacting, it would work as the small scale mine would come in first and mine at the surface level, where the large scale mine or Apple would then buy part of the product that they had just supplied, which will put money into the economy of the DRC. This will create a contract between the large scale mines and the small scale mines, allowing the large scale mines to have a secure supply and access to the land to drill on for cobalt that's underneath the surface once the small scale mines are done. And it's also important to note that there's a revise arrow between the third party auditor that's a non-for-profit and the task force. And this is to basically ensure that there's constant change to the practices if something isn't working.
Apologies, I was muted. Finishing off with our guidance here, we would like to recommend that the amount of cobalt used in batteries be reduced, as well as Apple find sustainable and green alternatives. So by reducing the amount of cobalt used in batteries, we've identified several pros. One of them being that there's a less reliance on a non-renewable resource. Another being potential to find cheaper alternatives or more environmentally friendly alternatives. And finally, we can move efforts towards focusing on recycling rather than extraction. Although one risk we did find with this is that the DRC economy is so reliant on cobalt that if there is a decline in demand, it could have devastating effects. So we kind of compared this to the Japan economy in the 90s with the tech bubble, where they have kind of yet to recover from that. And we think that with the DRC, you're looking at a business that only sells one product, and if it suddenly becomes obsolete, then they're left with nothing. So the mitigation we have for this risk is that by pursuing these alternatives, we are forcing the country to diversify, and so they're going to be better prepared in the long run in the event that the cobalt demand does take a sharp decline. And overall, it will improve everything else because there's going to be less mining for cobalt batteries, and you're going to have less issues with worrying about the work regulations within the mines because there is less mining going on overall. On the next slide, I have 3 graphs demonstrating some historic periods of pricing. So Apple is the most profitable technology company in the world, and we believe that they should lead by example. So on the left, I have a graph of the cobalt price in US dollars per metric ton. Several years ago, it was at a peak of around $90,000 per metric ton, and today it's around $30,000. But one thing to note is that in that same period, the price of an iPhone from 2010 to 2019 has increased tenfold, and the historical revenues of Apple have seen exponential growth. And so with Apple sitting on a record amount of cash and dominating 47.7% of smartphone sales worldwide, we believe that change is financially feasible and should not be an issue, especially considering their cash from investing activities has gone from 177 billion in 2015 all the way down to 40 billion in 2019. There's plenty of cash to distribute, and we believe they should be doing that. So as for the rest of the impacts, we would like to analyze how does this fit into our sustainable development goal number 9. So we believe that cooperation with ASMs and LSMs will decrease tensions between groups and will also increase the potential for land to extract cobalt in safer manners, of course, which Apple could then use to their advantage by realizing economies of scale if they were to continue production. But we do, of course, recommend that they phase out production slowly, and we realize that's not something that can be done immediately. And we do also realize that this is going to be a short-term cost, but we think that we should really be focusing on the long-term and reaping the benefits of that change. And so we'd like to close off with less mining occurring. We're going to see significantly less pollution, less worrying about workers being treated in bad manners, And finally, with Apple becoming more involved in these changes, we think there's going to be a trickle-down effect of sustainable innovation from other organizations as they follow suit, given that Apple is an industry leader.
Now, imagine our guidelines was put in place and you are back a stepmother in the DRC. Because of Apple and the LSM's contrast with the ASMI, you are now financially able to send your mom or your other children to school and have prevent many others from having the same fate as your son. Apple's change was the reason. Change is financially feasible, change is ethically correct, change is a legal necessity. Apple think different. Thank you.
All right, great job. Thank you, everyone. So we're gonna take some time now to ask a couple questions. So I'd like to start and see if, Gail, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask the group?
Very good job, by the way. I liked all the statistics. It gave me a very good background. The public disclosure of payments and contracts, I had difficulty with that in that how would that not help our competitors? I mean, we don't typically want them to know what we're pricing contracts out, and they might be able to have a competitive advantage or take away ours if there was public disclosure of payments and all the contracts.
Yeah, so I can answer that. Basically, with the public disclosure and of contracts and payments, we don't want our competitors to know that, but ultimately we do want a decline in Cobalt usage, as does a lot of the competitors now. So yes, we do want that transparency and that ability for shareholders and stakeholders to see what we're doing. And Apple is a very transparent company already. But basically, it just holds everyone to a higher standard, and we're hoping if Apple, as such an influential and profitable company, starts being more transparent, that other companies will follow suit in their transparency, in the hope that ethically they will be acting in a more justified way.
Okay, great. Thank you. Gail, did you have a follow-up or? You're good? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Let me ask Jana, do you have any questions for the group? Jana, if you're talking, it looks like you're on mute.
Yep. Having to do with the nonprofit, given the unethical practices of the DRC government and the potential for that riding over to a nonprofit, depending on how it's funded and all of that, is there any kind of a correlation, or is that nonprofit separate enough and knowingly separate enough to make it a viable choice?
I can take that one. We recommended a nonprofit because we first read about the International Rights Advocate solely taking the lawsuit for the plaintiffs. So they did that with no cooperation from the mining companies or the government. And even if the DRC government was not wanting to cooperate or not wanting to get involved, a nonprofit wouldn't be subject to any sort of regulation or wouldn't have any sort of financial player in the game if the government, again, was unwilling to cooperate. So we recommended that just because hopefully they're not out to get money and they won't try to
So you evaluated them based on their separateness and their, no real correlation. Okay,
yes.
good. Okay, thank you.
All right. Andreas, what questions do you have for this team?
Yeah, there we go. So my apologies if this is a redundant question, as I did disconnect for a few minutes. But in the you talked about the multi-tier certification system and the balanced panel of key players. Who are the key players in that, and how do you ensure that it's balanced in a way that is truly balanced and not skewed towards one party?
Well, the key players, if you want me to go back and share the screen, I can, but the key players that we noted were a member from the government. I personally did not research the exact setup of the DRC's government or what their, like, I guess, political, like, downgrade is, I guess. But then it's them, a non-government organization would be involved, and then a like person from Apple. Ideally, to make it so that it wouldn't be skewed in one person's direction, we would have the non-government organization be someone from a nonprofit who is separate enough where they would almost act as like a check and balance for the panel. And then we would have the same level of, I guess, control from the governmental standpoint as to Apple. So like if there was the president or whoever's in charge of the DRC, it would be the CEO of Apple, like type of comparison, so that their power dynamic would be more similar, because Apple and the government of the DRC are more equal in a power dynamic, I guess, for what they want out of Cobalt.
Perfect. And that third party, the non-governmental, the nonprofit, that's the one that Jana just asked the question about. Is that correct?
There would probably be two separate non-government organizations or non-for-profits, one for auditing and one for the panel, so that there wouldn't be, I guess, overlap.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Joe, over to you.
So thank you. And I also echo the fact that just a wonderful presentation. I specifically love the outline and the format of the slides. And what caught my eye, you know, your process of assessment and then the ethical evaluation, then guidance and then impact. But when you were discussing the evaluation phase, as a member of the board, I was very concerned when you sort of stated or alluded that perhaps we were not compliant with our own policies around supplier compliance. And so I really want to understand that as a member of the board. I want to be sure that we're taking that serious. So is that the case? Was there a question around us not, Apple, our organization, not being compliant with our own policies?
Yes. So there is kind of a inequality in the sense that what Apple and what you guys have put into your suppliers progress code of conduct for 2019 is not a completely unbiased way of evaluating yourselves. And although it does hold meaning to evaluate yourself, and we do think of the board of directors of Apple and Apple as a company as being very ethical in their decision making, as seen through their transparency, which we tried to emphasize during the, like, I guess, PowerPoint as it is. There's definitely an inequality between what the science was showing of the environmental deductions between waste management and the health of the people, and what was going on in the lawsuit that is currently being brought up. So that would just be something to revise through the third-party auditor that we've been suggesting.
Okay.
Sorry, I was going to add something that you could argue in a sense that Apple is compliant, in the sense that since there is very, very minimal government protection for the employees, in the sense of like a minimum wage or a physical protection, Apple is compliant in the sense that it's not breaking any laws in the DRC, but we believe that just Apple's standards and your standards as a company, as well as what we believe will become increased pressure from consumers for sustainable practices, that it's better to, like, I guess, sort of get a start on this now.
Yeah. Megan, can I have a follow-up question if I can?
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. Go ahead.
So that to that very point, then I think that's why you opened up with the human factor of imagine losing, you know, your own child in this labor challenge that we're kind of party to. What you know, so it's not just Apple. I mean, it's my understanding that Apple is a main buyer of Cobalt, but as we look towards the future, the auto industry, you mentioned Tesla, but the advent of more hybrid and more battery operated cars, that's going to be a huge demand on Cobalt. Wouldn't there be some dialogue or discussion around how to look towards the future? Can Apple manage all that? Is the demand for Cobalt honestly maybe move away from such huge demand from just iPhones or iPhones or other devices to cars? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I can take that because when we're doing the research, we also consider that question. So we think about what Tesla have been doing recently because they are also in the lawsuit. And then they haven't announced anything yet, but people have been saying that they already form a relationship with a tech company in China. They're trying to come up with some technical way to start making battery that doesn't require cobalt. And then Samsung is the other company who, yes, they don't make car, but they do create cell phone as well. And they already put out some actions facing this cobalt issue. That's why we think that Apple should make the move, because sooner or later, our competitor will make the move, and we don't want to fall behind because we have been always a leader in this industry. If that answers your question correctly.
Yep. Thank you very much. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I have one question, and then I'll see if anyone else, I know the other judges have kind of a go back. You know, your power asymmetry graph that was, I think, one of the earlier charts I thought was interesting, and I wanted to know more about kind of what had gone into the analysis behind the charts. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, you know, that chart and kind of how you came up with that metric, because I thought that was a really interesting point that I wanted to know more about.
Yeah, so we can actually screen share to the chart itself that we had put together. So if you go back and click on the power dynamic, it should take you there too on the appendix slide. Yes, so this is it. So basically, it's a very informal way of trying to quantitate qualitative information is basically how we did it. And so we split it into the company for stakeholders and then the community itself. And we assessed it using land use, land accessibility, skilled labor availability, a lot of important interests for these people. And we scaled it based off of how important it was for them and how much power they have over it. And we did this by taking data and taking quantitative, I guess, information from Apple's own supplier responsibility report, the Journal of Sustainability or Sustainable Mining, the Transport and Energy Organization, and the Extractive Industry Society Journal, which all mentioned these players in one way or another and talked about their, I guess, effects on the community itself. So, and by doing that, we were able to kind of classify using their score by adding across as what has high or low power, which just kind of helped us to, I guess, support our data.
Right. Thank you. Do any of the other judges have any other questions?
This is Gail. I just wanted to make sure I understood, because you're recommending that Apple reduces the content of cobalt in their batteries.
Yes.
Is there an alternative that exists at this point in time, or they're being developed?
Currently, they're being developed, which is why we set it as basically as a long-term guidance is what we were trying to get at. I personally do research in this field because I'm a chemistry major, and so I do research with batteries, and there are a lot of other options than using cobalt, of at least using other metals that be used for batteries in a more sustainable way. And if you go through Cobalt's mining process. It actually is like a very, very intense, multiple step process that uses many other, I guess, chemicals in the process, which makes it one of the worst environmentally to perform, I guess. And from doing this, like, it's kind of ironic as they're going into EV vehicles that that it's really bad for pollution and global warming and ozone layers, which we have support on too. So there are currently being developed other batteries that will be soon to be able to go on to production.
And
So I could,
oh, go ahead.
no, I was just saying I could support maybe looking at something in place of cobalt if there is an alternative. So that's why I was asking, how near are we? And if there's other metals, I don't know if it's similar cost. You're saying it's better environmentally, which is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know, did Jack have something to say?
Yeah, so I was going to say, short term, we realize that we can't just suddenly shift to a new resource using the battery. So I think our short term goal is to improve the practices within the cobalt mining industry to make it safer while we're still mining it. And then long term would be to start to develop the shift to more environmentally friendly alternatives.
Okay, and I think you guys made a good case for that. I'm still on public disclosure. I'm okay with public disclosure as long as it's not works to our detriment as a board and as a company to any competitive advantages we have.
Yeah, and Apple would be able to control what they're disclosing and what they're not disclosing, as always, but we're just pushing for more transparency in that.
Also keep in mind that cobalt is a commodity, meaning it's going to be the same price no matter what company is mining it or refining it.
Right.
So prices necessarily are always going to be public, and also Apple's main competitors are public companies. So while contract agreements aren't going to be disclosed, just the nature of the element is a pretty already disclosed thing.
As your prices of commodities are public, right?
Mm-hmm. Great discussion. Okay, I'm going to ask again, are there any other questions from the judges before we wrap up our question section?
I do have one more question. When we talked about alternatives, because I really, and guys, I didn't say this earlier, but really enjoyed the way that you presented and the depth. What I wanted to know as we think about the strategic implications of alternatives in the space, where does that fall within acquisitions? Do we look at, as a company, as part of this suggestion long term, if we're looking at alternatives to potentially acquire some of these companies that are making those alternatives and bring them in-house rather than having them as suppliers?
Financially speaking, I think that we have enough, or Apple has enough funds to do an acquisition, and I think that sooner rather than later, as we've seen with even just the coronavirus pandemic, always works in favor, especially with Apple being known as one of the most innovative companies in the world. By having acquisition, it would secure your supply chain and secure your footing in having an alternative.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Okay. Joe, any other thoughts from you before we end this part of our discussion?
No, I don't think so. I think that, I was intrigued with kind of, I guess, one other question around in the part of the sort of the closing part of the slide, there was some talk around the responsibilities of Apple from a business perspective around people, profit, and planet. And I just had to pause a bit on the planet piece in terms of, being a sort of a stakeholder. I mean, I don't know if Apple is committed to being a stakeholder of the planet, but I guess its environmental So just looking for more insight as to why I should be concerned about the planet as a company.
Well, personally speaking, from a personal obligation, and I think I can speak for my teammates, the main stakeholder for most companies is the environment, just because all companies are going to have some impact on the environment, whether it's good or bad. And with Apple being such a large company and using products that are natural resources, as well as creating products that can normally not be recycled or reused or even thrown away, I think it would be good to look into all of the effects that Apple has on the environment, not just in cobalt mining, and then maybe that would create a better sense of the fact that the environment is a stakeholder.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Just to add on to that and piggyback, we actually have quotes from Apple supplier code. Jack, if you would want to go back to the appendix slide, we can pull those up. But basically, Apple even says in here that they have environmental responsibilities at the core of how they operate. And this is from their supplier's code of conduct. And so that has already been established as something that's important to Apple and that would want to be continued into the future, especially with other pressures from CEOs like Larry Fink, who had his whole letter about how sustainability and environmental aspects is now the responsibility of big corporations.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I think we're going to kind of conclude our question section. Again, I just want to say really, well done on your presentation. Gosh, what really kind of knocked me back was frankly some of these backup charts that you had, ready at hand to answer some of these questions. I mean, overall, I thought your presentation was very well laid out. As I think Joe talked about, the outline that you had early on just did such a nice job of laying out for us kind of how you were going to structure the discussion. I thought that was great. And then, but yeah, now seeing how you've been able to reference these backup charts, it just shows how well prepared you are for the discussion. So I really have to commend you for the work that has gone into these charts in this package. I think that visually they were very well done. I think probably that one that I had poked at with the power asymmetry graph, I wish there had been more to help me understand in that chart exactly, kind of the analysis that had gone through, because I thought it was a really effective tool and a great point you were making there. And clearly a lot of work had gone into it. I just wish there had been maybe a little bit more in that chart that would have really made that clearer. But overall, really well done. The only other thing I would add is just a little bit of a nit. I heard several of you when you were speaking say, we believe, or I believe, or I think. And I would encourage you to try and kind of take those words out and state them as facts. So I heard a lot of, I believe this, I think this, I think this. We were getting your opinion. That's what we asked for, just take out those words. And I think it makes for a stronger argument. So, but excellent job. And I'm interested to hear, input from the other judges. So, Andreas, I'm going to start with you since I think I kept you at the end a couple of times. So.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, I'm looking at my my notes here, and Megan, you actually didn't mention a number of things. The I versus we versus think versus feel as another point that I was going to make as well. So I won't spend too much time on that. But the I versus we is just also a really important one because you represent an organization, and it's one unified view of the organization rather than you as an individual constituent within that organization, because it should be consistent among you. And if there's dissent, then you may want to bring that up in a meeting, but probably in a different part of the meeting. I also really like the chart as well. I would have liked to have seen, because I thought you guys did a really good job with visual aids. You had so many different types of slides, some more text heavy, some very data driven slides, and then some very visually guided slides. the visually guided slides, like the chart, I would have loved to have seen that blown out a little bit more for the components. So as you talk about the components, to understand them better, because I like how it flowed together. And I think you can visually draw your deck a little bit more together as a narrative by using some of those components. I also really liked how many backup slides you guys had. You were so quick to reference them. It's something that I know from experience is really frustrating when somebody asks a question and you're like fumbling with the clicker to try to get to the right slide. And you guys were like really quick on it. If somebody else was speaking, somebody else got to the slide really quick. So really well done on that. And also the quickness of the response of your questions and the delegation of who speaks to something. I thought you guys did really well. There wasn't too much like, oh, I'll answer that or I'll answer that. So you did a really good job of delegating who's speaking to what points, and your responses were really great. You were very well informed, and there was not much let me think about it. So really well done, guys. I might have something at the end again that might probably pop into my head, but I'll pass it over to the next one.
Okay. Jana, what would you like to share from your
I have to go back to what Andrea said and also what you had said at one point. Everybody was well coordinated. They knew what they were saying. It was a clean, crisp presentation. I mean, I've seen so many presentations where people would try and put what was in backup in the main slides, and that doesn't work. This worked really well because it was used as a backup. So I think the slides were great. I think the presentation was good. And I think you got your points. You know, there was a lot of information in here that I think you put out in a great manner.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you.
Gail, how about you?
I thought the amount and quality of the quantitative information was very good. And I like the information that I was given as background as to how important Cobalt was to the DRC, and what percentage of the population was working at the poverty level. Those were important facts that supported your asking for our consideration of changing how we do business going forward. I thought that you all did a great job. You were very prepared. You spoke with confidence, and I think that's extremely important in giving a presentation. Your eye contact was good, and so I was very pleased with the presentation that you gave.
Thank you.
And you guys did all of that virtually, which I got to say is really impressive. You're not even in the same room.
It was interesting at times.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, Joe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, again, I echo everyone's sentiments. Wonderful job. My sense of being a member of boards is this is the new normal. You know, a number of the boards I serve on, we've been doing, you know, Zoom meetings, WebEx meetings, and we always appreciate, you know, a concise, well thought out and planned presentation in that format, and that's exactly what I experienced. And you know, so many things I particularly like. The features, just as I look at the slide right here, and down below you see your menu there that kind of tells you where you're at in the presentation all along, and so it's really powerful to have that that investment and planning and structure was well done. I also think that in opening up, I think Ton had this piece around the human factor of all this. The story could, you know, grab the heart and mind around the challenge here. And so that got my attention in the beginning of the importance of this. And then here again, the slide that's in front of us that really talks about our documented code of conduct, supplier code of conduct. And when you read that, it's just oh so powerful in terms of the message and the conversation that you're having with us today. And so I would just add that, you know, in your conclusion, just be more directive and powerful. Go back to those questions that you start out with, which was yes, we must be ethically responsible. And yes, we can help change the working conditions this situation. So that's the only kind of coaching or feedback, is to close strong in your presentation to the board.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I think maybe, yeah, if I have, everyone reserves the rights for a go back, right? One thing I would probably add that I felt was maybe, I think could have helped maybe the closure is, I don't think you talked much about consumer pressures in this area. And I think, you know, given what we see these days about, you know, the viral campaigns where, you know, consumers are really demanding and calling companies out, you know, when they feel like, you know, companies are not doing enough. So I think, you know, it felt like there were times that's kind of where you were going to go, but I never felt like that really came through as strong as it could have. And I think, especially in today's day and age, I think that's absolutely something that boards are aware of and thinking about, is public, you know, perception, is pressure that they're going to get from consumers. And let's be, you know, everyone's a consumer of these products, and we will become even more so. So I think highlighting some of that could also have strengthened the argument. I think just one more thing you could have touched on, but since we're on this slide, I got to say, you know, when you first tried to answer Joe's question of, you know, why is the environment a stakeholder, it was kind of like, yeah, a little bit weak. Tying it back.
I was a little unsure of myself.
Yeah, that's hey, I mean, hey, first of all, answering questions on the fly like that is really hard. So that's why it's great to have a team. I mean, when I'm presenting, I love to have a team presentation to help me, because it's really hard when you're standing there or sitting here in front of X number of people to think on your feet that way. And I loved how then your teammate was able to step in and just go right there, because that frankly will shut someone up when you can just say, it's in your own code of conduct, kind of end of story. So I thought that actually made me chuckle. I thought that was great. So sorry, Joe. I thought you got that one. Okay. Anyone else have any other comments that they want to add? Okay. Well, I think we're good. Again, really great job, everyone. I appreciate you giving us the opportunity. I mean, I really appreciated, you know, being able to participate in this. I am very impressed by what you have been able to put together. So thank you, everyone, and really, you know, job well done. So thank you.